I'm David Debato, and you've just entered the No Delusion Zone. Hi, I'm David Debato, and you've just entered the No Delusion Zone. Hello, and welcome to the No Delusion Zone. It is my privilege today to invite our guest, Frank Figliuzzi. Frank is a retired FBI special agent of 25 years, where he served, among other positions, as the Assistant Director for Counterintelligence. He is now a national security contributor and regular columnist for NBC News and MSNBC. Frank is the author of two books, The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence, and his forthcoming book, Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers, which will be published in just 2 days and is available for pre-order. I encourage you to try to take a look at both books. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome to the No Delusion Zone, Frank Figliuzzi.
Thanks, David. When I saw the title of your show was No Delusions, I thought I've got to do that. So and then I dug deeper and saw some of your previous work and thought it really provided a service. So I'm glad we could do it.
Well, let me just tell you briefly at the outset, that name came about because I have been on LinkedIn for about 4 years. And I started out not to do too much other than what a lot of people do, which is to network and see who's out there. But very shortly, it came clear to me that it was infested by extreme right-wing people, MAGA people, and also, unfortunately, Kremlin-friendly people, whether they're operators, apparatchiks, plants, trolls, whatever. And I had so many of them that I had to eventually block. I think it was over 1,500, which was the limit LinkedIn allowed me to block. I would have blocked probably about 10,000. And from that, I used to have to tell them, please, no delusions. Let's stick to the facts. Yeah. And after that, people started telling me, well, you should really name your writing the No Delusion Zone. So that's where that came from. But anyway, I thank you for coming. Perfect. Frank, although, like I said before we started recording, that I want to primarily discuss, of course, American national security issues, I feel that I'd be remiss if we didn't at least briefly touch upon the horrific terrorist attack on the Russian concert hall, the Crocus City Hall, a concert venue just outside of Moscow. So please, if you could weigh in on your thoughts about that incident.
Well, first, this topic is not so distinct from the topic of our national security because, as you know, if it happens in Moscow, if it happens in Ukraine, it does impact us. Contrary to what many, I think, Americans would have us believe, there absolutely is a nexus to our interests and democracy writ large. So, yeah, I key in on a few things from my own FBI career. Clearly, what's called the duty to warn was triggered here, and I think many people were surprised to know that the State Department policy and the U.S. intel community policy is that, you know, from a moral and ethical perspective, if we have specificity on an imminent attack, we share it. We share it, and that's what it appears we did with regard to this so-called imminent attack. And there are also multiple reports that President Putin largely ignored it. In fact, almost mocked it in front of a meeting of his intel and military teams saying that he thought that warning was a provocation. And then there's been reporting, particularly good reporting out of the Ukraine press, that the same day, or at least the same couple of days that that U.S. warning came to Russia, Russia was in Kazakhstan killing two members of a terror cell that allegedly were plotting to attack a synagogue in Moscow. So it's quite possible that Putin thought he put that threat to rest, and he felt free to mock the U.S. warning because he felt he suppressed the threat. And of course, he didn't. Now, there's much speculation, of course, about whether or not, in two areas. One, is he going to parlay this into a stepped up posture against Ukraine and use it to rally his people for everything from increased drafting of military troops, if there's anybody left, to raising taxes for military resources? I say yes to that. I also am watching closely the reaction of the Russian people, because I feel like they just voted for Putin, to the extent we can believe any election in Russia, because he seemingly provides security to them. And I think it's very important to watch the Russian people and their response to this attack on a very popular, very famous venue in Moscow. Lastly, I know there's a lot of conjecture out there. I see it on social media, and even among the talking heads on cable TV, as to whether or not this was some kind of a false flag, or a deliberate attempt of Putin. I know it's unthinkable, but Putin attacking his own people for some greater purpose he has. I say to that, in my experience working the Russia target, that we absolutely can't rule that out. Sadly, we cannot rule that out. And are there indications of that? Well, I said and tweeted very early on after the attack that as I watched all the videos, particularly from Telegram, I saw the absence of security and police personnel at a major venue in Moscow. So if you think about that, you've been warned by the United States that an attack is imminent for large gatherings, possibly concerts, and you have already suppressed a threat in Kazakhstan, and you have no visible armed forces in that concert hall. I watched tape after tape, and I still never saw police or security. It kind of boggles the mind.
I agree. Just a couple of quick follow-up questions on this. You mentioned the Russian public, and everyone in the West is waiting, I think, for the Russian public to wake up and try to do something about Putin. What do you think the reaction of the Russian public will be specifically after this incident, which obviously showed that Putin is not omnipotent, that he has failed, at least in this case, to protect the Russian people, which was kind of the as you said, kind of the agreement. He can do as he wants with their freedoms as long as he keeps them safe.
This is a tough question because we're talking about, an environment where the authoritarian leader controls the domain, as we say in the intelligence community. He controls it, and he controls the media and the message. And so that makes it difficult for the truth to get out. But the truth eventually gets out, and people eventually do communicate with each other. And I think we've got a society there who has lost their sons, brothers, fathers, uncles, neighbors, loved ones in Ukraine by the thousands. And I predict they will grow weary of this. And what I don't know is the degree to which Putin's capable of leveraging the attack on the concert hall into kind of a rallying cry that rejuvenates the mindset of the Russian people, who again are just sick and tired of people dying. So can he do that? Can he connect the two dots? An Islamic jihadist allegedly attack and Ukraine? Well, he's already tried, hasn't he? Well, this line, it strikes me as humorous if this weren't so gravely serious. Well, these guys were caught fleeing toward Ukraine. I mean, it's kind of like, so therefore Ukraine is responsible. It's kind of like saying, the FBI saying these bank robbers in Buffalo New York, tried to flee toward the Canadian border. Therefore, Canada's responsible for robbing the bank. It makes no sense.
No, but that's typical Kremlin propaganda. One last
Yeah.
point on this. What do you think, in your opinion, from your experience, Putin will now do or be free to do after this attack?
Oh, he will use this. Whether he actually planned and staged this or not, he will convert this into a positive for him. And I think we're going to see stepped up attacks, renewed attacks. Summer's coming, spring's coming in Ukraine. I think he's going to use this to justify slaughter, quite frankly. And he's already been slaughtering people. The other thing is, don't be surprised if he decides, if this wasn't a staged event, if we see a very public trial, disappearance of senior intel or police officials in Moscow who he'll blame for not doing this, so that he deflects the blame from him and saying, look, I had some bad apples here. They screwed up and I've taken care of them.
Well, and he's certainly done a lot of that with the Ukraine war and many, many generals. Recently, the commander of the Ukrainian or the Russian Navy, for example. So I wouldn't be surprised either. Well, moving on to the U.S. and our problems, which are connected to Ukraine, as you did say. And I know you've written about this and talked about this, and we share a similar opinion on this, but it's not been broadcast or publicized anywhere near enough, in my opinion. In your professional opinion, based on your experience, especially as the head of the Counterintelligence Division of the FBI, what is your assessment of the counterintelligence threat made by Donald Trump in both raising or attempting to raise the money for his bond? And also, should he be reelected in November?
Yeah. Oh boy, I've written extensively on this, on Trump as national security threat, and I'll take this time briefly to say what I also say to people who think that I'm some far left deep state guy. I'm on MSNBC, therefore I must be some kind of far left liberal guy. I'm not. I see things, David, through my national security lens. In my career, I was about as apolitical as you could be. No one knew my affiliation. And by the way, no one walking around FBI field offices knew who was what, and we didn't care because we weren't there for politics. So I say that to preface what I'm about to say, because I see a threat. I saw one for 4 years in his administration, and I'm seeing it again with a man who is heavily in debt. We've learned a whole heck of a lot in this New York case, where the New York Attorney General has discovered, as have financial reporters, that his finances are a house of cards. His properties are leveraged against each other. He's using one building as collateral to get a loan for another building, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just dominoes. And so I feel for the New York AG team that has to go around going, okay, wait a minute now, which property are we seizing? Because we'll get a pittance over here after the bank takes theirs, and we're going to have to freeze his accounts. And it is truly a house of cards. And now, his bluff has been called. He's got to come up with this money, and we'll see what happens there. But when you have a candidate for president who has been president, who is so closely aligned with so many of our adversaries, and we can rattle them off from Russia to North Korea and Saudi. I mean, I still cannot believe we had an administration that blew off an assassination or beheading of a journalist and made it pretend that it was no big deal, and that the intel wasn't certain. So what does that mean? It means this is open season for all comers to try and get next to him and offer him a deal for money. And we still in this country do not vet our candidates publicly as they should be. I've written extensively, it's even in my first book, that I believe presidential candidates, and I take it a step further, I believe federal elected officials, members of Congress, should have to disclose all finances and all family finances, including foreign entanglements. And we don't do that enough. And the big question that will arise if we find out that Trump has reached into a foreign pocket for help will be whether or not that's some kind of campaign violation, taking foreign money as a candidate, but not directly for your campaign. I can see all the legal pundits spending hours trying to pontificate on whether or not a foreign loan to help you with legal problems while you're running is a kind of campaign contribution. We shall see.
My counterintelligence experience pales in compared to yours, but I don't think you have to even have experience in counterintelligence to know that if a high-ranking politician, especially a presidential candidate, is accepting money from any foreign power, much less a hostile power, that he very well could be a national security risk. Apparently, that doesn't get through to most Americans. And I have to ask you this, and I know you have written about it a lot. Why? Why hasn't that point gotten through to more Americans? Forget the MAGA people. They're going to go along with him, which even like he said, if he shot and killed someone on Fifth Avenue. But why haven't more Americans and even the Democrats put out the information about why Donald Trump, because of his foreign exposure and possibly accepting gifts and a lot of money from foreign intelligence agencies, poses a grave national security risk? Why are we not getting that?
There's a couple of factors here, and I have to give credit to the Trump team for doing this. I say the Trump team because I really don't believe he's intelligent enough to have orchestrated this so successfully. But first, he's done a masterful job of convincing many Americans that the so-called Russia allegations are just nonsense. And he's done a masterful job through use of his team members, including then Attorney General Bill Barr, to denigrate the Mueller report, right? You'll remember Barr put out a 4-page summary, called a press conference, took control of that situation. The GOP-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee likewise coming out saying, hey, there was a Russian attempt here to interfere with the election. He's successfully convinced enough people that this is just targeting of him. The other thing is him and far-right media has successfully convinced many Americans that the threat is overblown from these adversaries, that why can't we just be friends with Russia? What's so bad about a strong leader like Putin, right? This is Tucker Carlson would be the poster boy for this. Who was on Fox every night saying, what's wrong with Putin? Putin never did anything to me. And then he goes over to Moscow and actually lets Putin ramble for over 2 hours in a useless interview. So many people sit out there, David, going, that's a made-up threat. Russia not so bad. What's wrong with a strong leader? And then I feel compelled to add, this is a cult-like environment for his most hardcore MAGA followers, so he can do no wrong in that environment.
Do you have any hesitancy at all in calling MAGA a cult?
I've done it countless times on national live television. I don't say that lightly. I realize, the significance of saying that about my fellow American citizens, but I'd say it if they were trapped in a deadly cult of some other kind. But I've rattled through the definition of cult, the personality characteristics of followers and leaders. And I've also sadly had to focus on something called that real cult experts call forcing the end. That is when the cult leader has promised certain things, but they're not happening, and it becomes clear to the followers that they're not happening. The cult leader will also, quote, force the end, meaning he'll make sure that it happens, that something happens, or he'll destroy everybody in the process. And I point to David Koresh, the Branch Davidian in Waco, Texas, for that, where the evidence clearly shows repeated evidence, including thermal imaging and voice recording of him inside the compound, shows him giving the order to light on fire the corners of the building, which all went up simultaneously. Do I think that President Trump is capable of burning the place down figuratively? You bet I do.
Well, I applaud you for your honesty, because many pundits, media, mainstream media, elected officials refuse to call MAGA a cult. And in my opinion, that's just part of the overall problem right now, is they are not confronting this head on. They are not, for the most part, looking at this as a national security threat, especially the Democrats. They see this as just another rough political season, a rough campaign where they have to maybe do some dirty, deeds or fighting in the trenches, but they see it as nothing really out of the ordinary. And I know I'm overgeneralizing, but if they really truly saw this as a national security threat, they would not be doing what they're doing now. And just really quickly, I also get attacked regularly for being a liberal, a bleeding heart, a progressive, what have you, which makes me kind of chuckle, because until Trump, I was a lifelong Republican. So I voted for the Bushes and the Reagans and all that, and so it really it doesn't make me laugh anymore, because it's kind of sad. If you're not with them, you're the enemy.
Oh, yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we can go on and on about the whole terrorism and kind of threat posed by Trump, which is that we've demonized each other.
Yes.
He's certainly demonized us, and there's blame all around here. And when you demonize people, you then give license to harm them violently, and that's actually been happening.
Do you believe that Trump, as well as possibly some other GOP officials, may actually be under the influence of Russian handlers?
So we're kind of using, you just used a very traditional phrase, handler, in the counterintelligence world. And I think we're looking at a non-traditional intelligence compromise here. By that, I mean, does Trump have a symboled informant number? Does he have an assigned agent that meets with him secretly? No. Do I believe that early in his career, when he first visited Russia, that he got put on their radar screen, perhaps even by his own father-in-law at the time? And there's been a whole books written on this, which are fascinating. Yes, of course, it's standard Russian, just as it is standard Chinese practice to identify an up-and-coming American, powerful businessman, might go places someday. Of course, if they do that routinely, so particularly so with Trump. And they would use they quickly learned that his ego can be stroked successfully. They figured out who he was. And yes, I think he's controlled like a puppet, a Manchurian candidate? No, I think that it's more complicated than that. And some of it would be that he doesn't even quite understand how compromised he is.
I agree. He's not smart enough to be given a number and assignments and so forth, even for a lot of money. I mean, just my personal opinion is that he does this because he likes Putin. He loves him. He idolizes him as a mentor. And so a lot of this is just him. And they, like you just said, they know what to do. They know how to handle the Trump. They're stroking his ego, among other things, and he's just putty in their hands. It's disgusting, though, that the American public, not just MAGA, will refuse to believe that somebody as high as a president could be under the influence of a foreign or a hostile intelligence service. And I really do believe that's what we're looking at here, as well as some members of Congress. I'm sorry, based on just many recent actions that they've taken. What about that? Do you believe there are any members of Congress that don't have handlers per se, as you said, but are under Russian intelligence influence?
Under Russian influence? Oh, I can say that with 100% certainty, based on my career experience. There's no question about
high ranking or just run-of-the-mill officials?
Members of Congress during my career as the head of counterintelligence, and I refer to this without naming names in the book, that my first book, The FBI Way. But yeah, I had to personally deal with at least one member of Congress. Actually, let me scratch that and say two, who we had reason to believe were in inappropriate and repeated contact with foreign intelligence officers. And I'll just leave it at that. But of course, there's influence, and it's not just Russia. It's not just Russia.
Oh, sure.
You know, the whole goal is to identify somebody early in their political career, and then ride along with them, making sure you're helping out.
Okay. Enough said on that for now. Let me ask you this. And this is, well, maybe it is, well, it is a national security question, but a little different perhaps. How do you count for the widespread and even growing lure within MAGA of its associated violence, racism, and anti-democracy feelings with tens of millions of what I would consider otherwise sensible, caring Americans, our neighbors? Uh, why do they seem to, within the last several years, especially the last 3 years since the last election, seem to just agree with violent, rude behavior? Obviously, January 6th, it overflowed with that anti-democratic sentiments and actions. How do you account for such a large percent of the American population, as I said, in the tens of millions, readily becoming part of that MAGA movement?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could tell you that this is a one-off, an aberration that, it's never happened before. It's a singular event in history and it'll go away. No, if you study history, some of the worst authoritarian dictators, strongmen, were welcomed and embraced with open arms by their population, including Hitler. People vote for this. They vote for this. It wasn't forced. Where, if you look at Mussolini and Hitler and others, this wasn't a hostile takeover so much as it was the people saying, we need this at this time in history. And how does that happen? They are made to believe it. They are made to believe it. This isn't organic within people. They are fed delusion and misinformation. And we're in an environment now where our news feeds are our own echo chambers. We sit in front of our screens, only exposed to whatever news, so-called news, we want to see. We never take the time to poke our head out of the rabbit hole and look around, watch other networks, talk to other people, get different sources, check our facts. We don't do that. We get spoon-fed this, and the environment is optimized for that with the internet, social media. Throw in the COVID quarantine, where people spent record amounts of time in front of their screens getting fed this stuff, and here we are. And then it is a formula for this. I just interviewed Barb McQuaid, a fellow analyst and on MSNBC, law professor at University of Michigan Law School, about her new book, Attack from Within. It's on the bestseller list. Last time I looked, it was number 3. It's about disinformation. The first half of her book is how we got here, and it is a masterful. We've got to give the Trump side credit for this, and who the puppeteers are. I think it's a number of people, a handful of people doing this, but it's right out of the textbook. It's the playbook for authoritarian takeover. So the environment was ripe. Social media is, with regard to this issue, is our enemy on this. It's absolutely spreading the fire of disinformation, and we're stuck here. I'll note that Barb McQuaid's book, the second half of it, talks about how we get out of this hole. But you know what? It's not a short-term fix. It's not. We're here. We're entrenched, and it's not easily going away.
I hear everything you're saying, and I agree with it, of course, but this is the United States of America, Frank. Whatever happened to American exceptionalism and the thought that this could never happen here? That was a phrase that I've heard my whole life until recently. And guess what? It's now happening here. What happened? Are we not exceptional, or we're just basically the same as everyone else, I guess, given the right circumstance?
Yeah, a great question, because I think some of the most disturbing interviews that I've seen done recently by media types is when they wade into a crowd at a MAGA rally, or they go to some protest and they put a microphone in somebody's face and they ask them, well, you understand you might be actually voting against democracy. You understand there might be some element of fascism to what you're saying. And they look at the camera and they go, yeah, I'm good with that. I'm good with that. It's time. It's time. This has happened throughout history, but they've been led to believe that crime is absolutely rampant and out of control, where the latest data, the very latest data, shows that violent crime, particularly murder, continues to decrease. But yet, if you watch Fox News every night, you get nothing but video of smash and grab robberies, or, you know, someone's killed somebody somewhere. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. But the data shows that it's going down. And then with regard to the migrant crisis, and here's where I'm going to get into some controversial thinking. You know, with regard to the migrant crisis, again, far right platforms every day. Somebody's raping somebody. The migrants are causing crime. Again, the data, yes, do those things happen? Yeah, they happen in the general population at far greater rates. And the data actually shows that in the cities receiving the most migrants, the crime is going down. Now, is there a correlation? No, probably not. But it shows you the lunacy of trying to link the migrant thing with out of control crime. And then the drug, you know, they're carrying drugs into the, well, okay, again, let's go. I hate to interrupt with the facts, but let's go with what we know about where the majority of our drugs come from. It's not in a backpack coming through, wading across the Rio Grande River. Yes, does that happen? Yes, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the metric tons of drugs that come in through legit ports of entry. And it happens every day. I can recall I was a assistant special agent in charge in Miami. And, you know, what I saw at the ports of Miami and Fort Lauderdale, oh my God, literally cargo ships, you know, with secret compartments in the hull, bringing in, I'm not kidding, metric tons of cocaine and heroin into Florida. And we're worried about the migrant with a backpack bringing something in. It just defies logic and data, but this is where we are. And why am I saying this will be controversial? Because I think with regard to, you know, your initial question, how did we get here? How do people believe this stuff? There is an element of racism in this, and I know people will flip out on that. But what I mean by that is you can't help but understand that a group like the Oath Keepers was created immediately after the election of President Obama, our first Black president. They went and literally planted a flag up in Lexington, Massachusetts, and declared, you know, it's time for us to do battle. The migrant thing, if these were white, blue-eyed guys coming over the border from Canada, I think we'd say, hey, come on in. And you know, as Trump has said in his history, we need more, what did he say? More Norwegians or something. What? And you know, so yes, there's an element of that, and you can't overlook disenfranchisement. When I studied international terrorism, and you look at who those people are, look at the 19 hijackers on 9/11. Some of them were brilliant engineers. They had engineering degrees. Mohammed Atta, the leader, had an engineering degree. Mm-hmm. So when you study them, you find disenfranchisement, the belief, real or not, that they couldn't get a job or a good enough job or couldn't make ends meet where they were. And we have a sizable portion of society that seems to think the sky is falling. And yes, technology is passing them and their jobs by. And they don't want to hear about retraining. They don't want to hear about learning robotics or clean energy. They seem to want to stay in the coal mine and keep their coal job. And so, you know, they get laid off, outsourced, and all of a sudden they're willing to give up democracy.
I hear you again, and I agree. It's a very discouraging picture. And I guess my follow-up to that is it's very difficult, as you know, to break through to a cult or even an impassioned group of people who believe something and don't want to listen to the facts, because I've watched far too many of those same videos that you're talking about, especially the MAGA rallies, and you can't broach facts with them. They will literally physically attack you if you approach them with facts. So my question is it too late? Have we waited? When I say we, all the non-MAGA people who care about America, have we waited too long to try to combat the lies and disinformation which have turned tens of millions of Americans into violent MAGA fanatics? Is it too late?
So I'll never say it's too late. I will say this: we're far enough down a path right now where this cycle has to play out. And I'm sorry that I have to say that, and I don't know, people say, well, what cycle? What are you talking about? How long? And I don't know the answer to how long, but I think it's going to be a generation. I think that. I think since history repeats itself, we've seen this play before, whether it's Italy or whoever. We're going to have something horrible happen. I hate to say that, but what snapped Italy out of where they were in history was the death of the people were getting killed who were running for office. That's horrible. But Italy said, time out. We can't have that happen. And I hope to God that doesn't need to happen here. I hope to God that Americans are saying, no, we don't want that happening here, and that we can put the brakes on before that. But we seem to have convinced ourselves that we're ready for an era of less democracy, more authoritarianism. And these people have been led to believe that one man's going to fix this for them. Even though he spent 4 years in the Oval Office, didn't fix a goddamn thing, didn't build the wall. Million people died of COVID. I don't know what people think he's going to fix. Is he going to fix the price of gas for you? The price of eggs? Is that what you're worried about? What is it? Or is it that you really don't like brown people coming into the country? You don't like the statistics that show that we will be a brown country soon. Is that what it is? We're losing our Western culture? It's interesting. We didn't seem to think we were going to lose our culture when my grandparents immigrated here, whether you're Irish or Italian or Polish. We didn't really bat an eye. But brown people are coming. Now we've got a problem.
Well, I'll go one step beyond you, because I'm pretty rude and say what I want, and that this is the No Delusion Zone. It is a racist issue. MAGA, and we haven't even talked specifically about Christian nationalism, which is part of MAGA, of course, a big part. This is based, among other things, on white supremacy and racism, which are tied together. They're inseparable, in my opinion. And I will say that I think that a great deal of the support that MAGA gives to the Republican Party is racist in origin, and because of the left behinds, the people that you had alluded to earlier, who have been left behind, some of them, but refuse to be retrained, refuse to move to areas where there are jobs, and just want to complain, and in some cases become violent about it. So I'll go out on a limb and say that yes, it's definitely based on racism, as well as some other alleged grievances. This may seem like a silly question after all we've talked about, but I'd like to hear you comment on it anyway and make a statement rather. In your opinion, is right-wing extremism the #1 national security threat currently posed in America?
So it's interesting because, I come out of a foreign counterintelligence background, and it's an interesting question. I look at it this way. I'm going to use a perhaps poor analogy. You have a law enforcement background, and you and some of your listeners will know what I'm talking about. But when you do firearms training, one of the things they teach you when you're confronted with multiple threats, right? And they'll set up on the firing range multiple targets, and you have to make a decision, right? Who am I taking out first? And it might be that target that's 20 yards from you has two fully automatic rifles in his hands. And so you look at that and your brain says, that is my biggest threat. But there's also a target with a handgun who's 5 yards from you. And the training is you take out the nearest threat first, because that's the one that's going to get you. So what you might say, well, Frank, what are you talking about? So the domestic threat is right here, and it's imminent. It may not seem, and it does not have the power and the capacity of a China or a Russia or even in Iran. Of course not. No. but it is the nearest threat. And so I like to tell people, we cannot take our eyes off, and we must be aggressively working China, Russia, North Korea, and all the foreign threats. But, and boy, China, let me just say, internationally, China is absolutely the number one threat. No comparison. But the domestic threat is on top of us and an existential threat to our democracy. In fact, the Russias and Chinas of the world, they are besides themselves with glee at how truly screwed up we've made ourselves with little help from them. Some, but mostly we did this to ourselves. And they couldn't be happier about it. So the international threat is gleeful about the domestic threat we have. We've got to address that first. It's the nearest threat. And it's a threat that's existential to our democracy. Do I think Russia and China are going to bring down our democracy? I don't. They want to, but I don't. Do I think that people inside the United States have the capability to destroy our democracy? Yeah. Yeah, they're doing it now. Yeah. So so that's a very long way of saying, yes, if I look at the immediacy of the threat and proximity, yes, it is the greatest threat to our democracy, domestic.
Well, and to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, if this country is to fall, it's going to be from within. No foreign power has the ability to conquer us. We have that ability uniquely into ourselves. Let me dovetail this, and you mentioned this before a little bit, but I think it's again important for the American people to hear this. In your opinion, how is the survival of Ukraine specifically tied into U.S. national security?
Oh, my goodness gracious. We could do an hour, I think, on that. But
in 2 words or less.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well,
no, take your time, of course.
Well, I'll give you one word: democracy. Democracy. These are people who are free, want to continue to be free. And Putin is deluding even Americans, saying, "Oh, all that used to be ours. They're Nazis over there. We're going to take back what's ours." Not accurate. Not accurate. Even in a 2-hour interview with Tucker Carlson, it's still not accurate. We are degrading. People say, "Oh, we're fighting a proxy war. That's what we're doing. We're actually at war with Russia." Yes. Yes, you heard it from me. We are fighting a proxy war. And you know what? We need to degrade and have degraded the Russian threat. They're losing their ships. They just lost 2 ships the other day. Ukraine blew them up. They're losing their troops, their materiel, their artillery. They're running out of bullets. They're having to go to North Korea. Yes. Yes, and it's okay. We should be degrading the threat from Russia, because the threat from Russia is a threat to Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and us. And so I have no problem saying we're in a proxy war, and we should be.
Why hasn't the Biden administration made that absolutely clear to the American people?
I think that they're not doing it enough. There are members of Congress who spell it out quite clearly, because I'm not sure they think the American mind can get around that. Like, wait a minute, we're fighting a war, but we're not there, and we need to degrade this threat. But Fox News says it's not a threat, and can't we spend that money on our schools and roads and bridges? Should we be doing that? By the way, that's a valid argument. I love to have a discussion on that. Hey, could we better spend the money? Actually, yeah, we could better spend the money, but we have to have a long-term view of things. And in the long term, if you empower Russia, give him more ports, more land, more access to gas and oil resources and agriculture, which all is in Ukraine, then you're empowering an adversary that will come back to bite us, guaranteed. And by the way, better to be in a proxy war with no boots on the ground than have Putin invade Poland, and we're going to put boots on the ground because of NATO. So you pick your poison.
Well, we talked about the violent tendencies and actions of MAGA and how it's probably getting worse. So let me ask you, have you seen an increase rather in threats and or violence against Democrats, election officials, and their families in the last, I would say, 6 to 12 months?
Yes. the data is there as well. And that's, I can already hear people saying, well, there have been Republicans threatened too. Yep, there have. But the numbers are clear that the threats are being generated from the Trump trial cases, the Trump mantra that he's being victimized. So you've got people willing to die. That's something that comes from international terrorism. If you want to know you have a terrorism problem, look around and see if people are willing to die and martyr themselves for the cause. And the answer is yes, they are. You have the man in Provo, Utah, who reportedly swung a rifle at FBI agents trying to arrest him for threatening to kill President Biden, among many others. He died for his beliefs. You have the man in Cincinnati, Ohio, who tried to breach the FBI field office there. He died for his beliefs. People willing to go to prison forever, at least for their foreseeable future. The woman in Texas who left death threats on Judge Chutkan's voicemail, she'll go away for a long time. People are willing to sacrifice their freedoms and their lives for a cult, for a leader. And that tells me we do have terrorism here. That's what we're dealing with.
Well, and you're correct. I mean, this is almost out of the playbook for terrorists around the world. When I served with the U.S. Army as a counterintelligence agent in the Middle East, that was standard operating procedure. You would kidnap and hold hostage the families of political enemies, and if necessary, you'd kill them or torture them. It happened all the time, especially under such genuine nice people like Saddam Hussein. So now that's happening in the United States, or at least attempted to happen, where election officials, for example, have their homes surrounded by armed militia and threaten to kill the families inside. Again, something I never thought I would see in America, but that comes right out of the International Terrorists Handbook. And to be honest, it's absolutely disgusting to me. To follow up on that, I think it's related to this. What do you make of the recent threat during a MAGA rally by Trump of a bloodbath should he not win the November election? Do you believe that's just hyperbole, or he was referring to the economy, or did he literally mean a bloodbath, in your opinion?
So based just, I'm not, you don't need to engage in conjecture here. He has a past record of this, where he says he spouts some violent rhetoric. He knows it's going to incite people. He knows it's going to he's guaranteed media coverage for having said it that night, because his rallies generally aren't covered by mainstream press. So he needs to say something to get on the evening news. And he says that, knowing full well that there's a history of people acting out on his verbiage, brown invaders, for example, and the Walmart shooter in El Paso echoing in his own writings the words of Trump, the Buffalo supermarket shooter believing the great replacement theory, whites are being replaced. There's violence attached to his rhetoric. He knows that. It's not accidental. And then what he does, he has this technique of then having his people kind of back off the next day. Oh, no, what he meant by bloodbath, if he doesn't win, is economic. It's economic bloodbath. Oh, it'd be terrible for the economy if he does, or something like that, right? And we're all supposed to go, oh, we rest easy now. Oh, he misspoke. No. This is a call and response that's going on between him and his followers. Will he have plausible deniability? Yeah, in his mind, he will, just like he did with the rally on January 6th. Oh, I didn't mean, for them to beat up police officers. Well, you sat there and did nothing in the Oval Office while it was happening. Took hours for you to get out and say something reluctantly about stopping. You tweeted, be there, will be wild. You told the crowd that the Secret Service told you was armed. You said, let's all go march to the Capitol now, right? We have to fight or we're not going to have a country anymore. What do you think is going to happen? So it's call and response.
Well, I'm going to circle around to that in just a moment before we end up here, but I do need to ask you your opinion about Project 2025. Which I believe was authored by the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? I, of course, have read it several times, and I won't. I've written about it already. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, speaking of we just got through speaking about Trump using this rhetoric and then backing off the next day. So we have a situation with Project 2025 that involves planning for the next Trump administration. And it's scary stuff. It's everything from coming up with potential cabinet members who will, curl your hair in terms of not only their lack of experience, but their lack of investment in democracy. Doing away with civil service protections for career federal employees. And you say, well, what does that mean? Who cares? Well, what you mean is you're going to eliminate people who actually just want to show up and do their job in their federal agencies, right? And what does that mean? Well, it means that maybe, the heads of all FBI field offices get picked by Trump. Imagine that. Imagine that the decision making on whether you open an investigation or not is made by a person who's absolutely loyal to Trump and not the Constitution. Loyalty tests, to be given. Interview sheets have been written up on how you interview a potential federal employee, about whether they're loyal or not, and who their favorite president is. And this is scary stuff, but it's ready to insert people who are less concerned about democracy and more concerned about Donald Trump into our government.
Well, I have to say that's another major failure on behalf of the media, if not the Democrats. On this, I don't know anybody outside of my professional circle who follows these things that's even heard of Project 2025. So if he is reelected, this will be law. This will be enacted immediately because nobody's even heard of it to object to it. And I think, again, that's a major, major failure. And one of the reasons Trump is so successful. There's no pushback. There's very little pushback by the mainstream media or the Democrats. Would you agree with that?
Well, so again, we're in this vicious cycle or circle where I'm all over that because I get my news from sources that actually report the news and dig deeply into this. But we don't have enough Americans doing that and seeking out these answers. So even if you are a Trumpster, why wouldn't you dig into Project 2025 and figure out what it is and whether you believe in it or not? Maybe you do. I've seen people say, yeah, that's good. The president needs to be stronger. We need to insert his sycophants into government more. We need to get rid of this deep state.
Well, I'm crazy enough that I think this should be the headlines in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, something like plan written to end democracy, which is what it is. But they didn't do that.
It is. It's right. How to end a democracy in 90 days. That's pretty much what it is.
Exactly. But they didn't do that. And it's thoroughly discouraging. If Trump wins, and as you know, there's a good chance that he might, I pin it solely on the lack of the American media and the Democrats to effectively put out a counter argument. I really do.
Well, it's worse than again, I'm contracted with MSNBC News, right? And so they are doing the best job that I've seen with regard to this kind of coverage. But I'll go a step further. You say, not offering a counter. They're part of the problem at the media. Look at Fox News and News Nation and all. I'm sorry, not News Nation, but OAN and Newsmax. Excuse me, Newsmax. And they're not. It's not just that they're not countering; they're enabling and facilitating it. It's their mission in life to pick a guy who's going to counter our democracy. So when the history books are written, yes, the media will be looked at strongly and negatively, but not just for not saying enough, but rather for actually enabling and facilitating.
Well, I of course, am not on the payroll of NBC News or MSNBC, but I will say I watch it regularly, and they are one of the few mainstream media platforms that actually, and on a regular basis, do counter the arguments. They do have guests such as yourself and others that put the other side of the equation out there and do put the facts out there and tell the truth. But they are unfortunately few and far between.
Yep, for sure. I'll go back to something you said early on, which is that everybody seems to still be treating this kind of like a normal election. And it's not, I sat there and even watched my own network, during the primaries, pretend that this was some kind of great contest to tune into. Oh my goodness, what is Biden going to win? Is Nikki Haley going to win here? Come on. We know where this is going. It's not, I don't need to watch what's going to happen in North Carolina, South Carolina. It's done. It's done. Let's go ahead and paint this as it is, an existential threat to democracy as we know it.
I wish you weren't correct, but I fear that you are. So finally, to wrap this up, Frank, what's your opinion? I know you've talked around this and actually directly to this during this this interview, but should Donald Trump be elected in November, what would some of your projections be for America in a second Trump term?
This will be a revenge tour. And so he will attack anyone he perceived, and in many cases he'll be correct, as having not served him well or spoken out against him. So the generals, the cabinet members, all of which have come out now, he's going to attack. But far more importantly, and this is what I keep asking people, do you understand this could be reversed the next election or 8 years from now, 10 years from now? This could all be reversed on you. So if you have no problem with fascists and authoritarians in power because they're with your guy, what about if they weren't? What if they were fascists and authoritarians who were with another person that you hated, another candidate, another president? So look, we could see things like Secretary of Defense Michael Flynn, twice convicted, pled guilty. You could see him as Secretary of Defense. Attorney General, my God, I can't even imagine, but it's going to be bad. It's going to be somebody who's willing to subject themselves to Trump and be loyal to Trump and decide that we're just not going to investigate public corruption when it's committed by a Republican. Or I'll investigate, but Trump has to approve my investigation. You'll see inspectors general at all of the federal agency, which were a thorn in Trump's side because they were the ones that whistleblowers would come to. They were the ones that would investigate whether something was properly opened or not at the DOJ or FBI. Those inspectors general will go away, or they will report directly to him, and you'll see them utilized as weapons against agencies to essentially rat out employees who are trying to do their job in various agencies. You'll see a DNI, Director of National Intelligence, who will weaponize intelligence. It won't just be that, hey, Trump doesn't want to hear anything about a Russia briefing today. It will be far worse than that. It will be, let's turn the spy cameras on. Let's turn the electronic intercepts on against Trump's enemies. Let's weaponize intelligence. And what does that mean? House of cards for our allied relationships. I don't know how the allies would continue to share with us, work with us, have our back around the world when they can't trust the intelligence community.
I agree with you. These are dark thoughts. My personal opinion on when this will change as far as MAGA is, like you said, it's not going to change at least for another generation. It's going to take, as you said, a major cataclysmic event or for the older MAGA supporters to die out. And that sounds pretty harsh, but I believe that's the way it's going to be. This is a huge cult, larger than the cult of Nazism during World War II, because we have a larger population, or at least as big. So I think it's going to take a generation. They have to die out, or there's going to have to be something even worse, a cataclysm, which I truly hope doesn't happen. Frank Figliuzzi, thank you very much for an incredible interview. This is Frank Figliuzzi, retired Associate Director of Counterintelligence for the FBI, author of Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers, soon to be released and is now available for purchase. Thank you very much, Frank.
Thanks for all the time, David. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you for watching this edition of the No Delusion Zone. And remember, anyone can have their own delusions, but they can't have their own facts. Take care, stay safe, and stay sane.